The sun was a merciless sovereign, reigning over a kingdom of baked earth and shimmering air. Leanne felt its oppressive heat through the fine muslin of her white prairie dress, a garment that had seemed so practical in the cool, shaded rooms of her former life, but was now a beacon of foolish optimism in this raw, untamed landscape. She sat poised on the borrowed horse, her spine straight, her hands folded over the pommel, a portrait of composure she did not feel. The man guiding her, Mr. Alastair Finch, a land agent with a thin smile and eyes that never quite met hers, had spoken of promise, of fertile ground and a sturdy, welcoming home. He had painted a picture of a new beginning, a blank canvas upon which she could finally paint a life of her own design. For this she had paid a handsome sum, a fraction of the hidden fortune that was her true declaration of independence. The rhythmic plod of the horse's hooves was the only sound, a percussive beat counting down the final moments of her long-held dream. He finally reined in his mount, gesturing with a sweeping, magnanimous arm. "There she is," he announced, his voice slick with false bonhomie. "Your future, Miss Shin, the plot you purchased." Leanne's gaze followed his gesture, and the carefully constructed composure within her fractured, then shattered. Before them lay not a sturdy home, but a blackened scar upon the earth. The skeletal remains of a cabin slumped in on itself, a charcoal maw gaping at the indifferent blue sky. Chimney stones were scattered like broken teeth, and the ground was a carpet of ash and cinders, where the very memory of life had been incinerated. It was a scene of utter desolation, the ghost of a promise. The air smelled of soot and sorrow. This was not a beginning. This was an ending. This was a grave. This story is about rising from those very ashes, a testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It's a journey of resilience that I am honored to share with you. Before we jump back in, if you enjoy tales of courage and unexpected alliances, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Your support allows these stories to be told. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, the sound obnoxiously loud in the funereal silence. "A most unfortunate incident, to be sure," he began, his tone shifting from salesman to undertaker. "A stray spark from a passing train, they say. Happened just last week. A terrible shame, but the land itself is still prime." He spoke as if discussing a minor inconvenience, a scuff on a polished shoe rather than the complete obliteration of her purchased sanctuary. Leanne slid from her horse, her boots sinking into the soft gray ash. The white hem of her dress was instantly sullied, a fitting metaphor for her sullied hopes. She walked toward the ruin, her steps slow and deliberate, her mind a maelstrom of cold, precise fury. The deception was breathtaking in its audacity. He had known. He had ridden with her for 2 days from the nearest town, knowing full well the destination was this wasteland. He had taken her money, her trust, and led her to a pyre. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable, her small frame radiating an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his saddle. "The contract stipulated a habitable dwelling, Mr. Finch," she stated, her voice quiet yet carrying the weight of tempered steel. "This is not habitable." He offered a placating, dismissive shrug. "An act of nature, Miss Shin. The company is not liable. The deed is for the land. What stands upon it is subject to the whims of fate." He was already turning his horse, eager to be away from her and the ruin that testified to his fraud. "My advice? Sell the deed back to me for a fraction of the cost. A gesture of goodwill, you understand, and return east. This is no place for a delicate woman alone." He did not wait for a reply, spurring his horse into a canter and leaving her standing in a cloud of dust and ash, the sole inhabitant of her ruined kingdom. She did not watch him go. Her attention was fixed on the wreckage, her mind already moving past the betrayal, past the anger, and into the cold, clear realm of calculation and survival. The sun beat down, but she no longer felt its heat. A different fire had been kindled within her, one that would not be so easily extinguished. Leanne walked the perimeter of the devastation, her mind a ledger, taking inventory of the ruin. The foundation stones, though blackened, seemed mostly intact. The well, covered by a heavy slate cap, was blessedly untouched by the fire, its cool, dark water a promise of life. A small, dilapidated shed at the far edge of the property had also survived, its weathered boards a testament to being just beyond the fire's hungry reach. It was not much, but it was something. It was a start. With the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet that felt like a mockery of her circumstances, she made her way toward the distant glimmer of the town they had passed through, a place called Harmony Creek. It was a 5-mile walk, and she undertook it with a steady, unhurried pace, her sullied white dress a stark contrast to the deepening twilight. She ignored the ache in her feet and the hollowness in her stomach, focusing only on the task ahead. Entering the town was like stepping onto a stage. The few inhabitants still out on the dusty main street stopped to stare. A lone Chinese woman, elegant despite her dishevelment, was a spectacle. She paid them no mind, her gaze sweeping over the storefronts until she found the one she sought, the general store, a beacon of light and civilization. The bell above the door announced her entry with a cheerful jingle. Behind the counter stood a woman with hair the color of spun silver pulled into a severe bun, and eyes as sharp and knowing as a hawk's. This was Martha, the proprietor, and she missed nothing. "Evening," Martha said, her voice dry as the summer dust. "You look like you've had a long acquaintance with a bad road." Leanne inclined her head slightly, a gesture of polite respect. "I require some supplies, a bedroll, a lantern, oil, rope, and whatever preserved food you might recommend." She spoke with a formal clarity that was as unexpected in this setting as her appearance. Martha's eyes flickered over Leanne's soot-stained dress and the determined set of her jaw. She began placing items on the counter, her movements efficient and practiced. A sturdy canvas bedroll, a tin lantern, a can of oil, a coil of thick rope. She added several tins of beans, a bag of dried apples, and a slab of salted pork. "At the parcel Finch sold you? The old Miller place?" Martha asked, her tone casual but her gaze piercing. Leanne simply nodded. "Heard it went up in smoke. Figured he'd neglect to mention that part." There was no pity in her voice, only a statement of fact, a cynical confirmation of what she already knew about men like Finch. When the items were tallied, Leanne reached into a small, discreet pouch tied to her waist and produced not a few meager coins, but crisp banknotes, paying the sum without a word of haggling. The sight of the money and the quiet confidence with which it was presented caused one of Martha's eyebrows to arch slightly. She had seen desperate women arrive in this town, but this one was different. There was no desperation here, only a deep, unyielding resolve. "The well water should be fine, but boil it first," Martha advised, her tone softening almost imperceptibly as she packed the goods into a burlap sack. "And watch for snakes. They like the cool of the foundation stones after dark." It was the closest thing to a welcome Leanne had received. She shouldered the heavy sack, gave another polite nod, and walked back out into the night, leaving the warmth and light of the store behind her. The long walk back to her desolate property awaited, but now she was armed. She had tools, sustenance, and the potent fuel of Martha's knowing cynicism. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a landowner, and she was home. The darkness that greeted Leanne back at the homestead was absolute, a thick, starless blanket that swallowed the landscape. The only sounds were the whisper of a low wind through the charred timbers and the distant, lonely cry of a coyote inside the rickety shed. Sweeping away inside the rickety shed sweeping away years of dust and debris with a broken piece of board. It was small, barely large enough for her bedroll, but its 4 walls and a roof felt like a fortress against the immense and indifferent wilderness. She unrolled her bedding, the rough canvas a world away from the soft linens of her past. Yet it offered a more profound comfort, the comfort of ownership, of self-sufficiency. As she ate her meager meal of cold beans directly from the tin, her thoughts drifted back not to the fire or to Finch's treachery, but to the life she had orchestrated her escape from. She was the daughter of a wealthy silk merchant in San Francisco, a man who saw her as a beautiful, biddable asset to be married off to the highest bidder to forge a business alliance. Her future had been a meticulously planned prison of social obligations and domestic servitude. But her mother, a woman of quiet strength and hidden sorrows, had seen the fierce intellect and independent spirit in her only child. Before she passed, she had secretly established a trust for Leanne, a considerable fortune that was hers and hers alone. The mail-order bride advertisement had been a clever deception, a means to an end. It provided a socially acceptable narrative for a single woman to travel west and acquire property, a way to use her inheritance to buy not a husband, but freedom. Finch had been merely a corrupt gatekeeper to that freedom, a hurdle to be overcome. The fire was another. She would overcome them both. She lay down on her bedroll, the hard ground unforgiving beneath her, and stared up at the cracks in the shed roof. The world saw a delicate, abandoned bride. They saw a victim. They did not see the heiress. They did not see the strategist, and that, she knew, was her greatest advantage. Days bled into a week, each one a testament to grueling, monotonous labor. Leanne's hands, once soft and accustomed to holding porcelain teacups, were now raw and blistered from hauling away charred wood and wrestling with fallen beams. Her muscles ached with a deep, satisfying pain, the pain of progress. She had cleared a significant portion of the cabin's footprint, piling salvaged, usable timber to one side and creating a massive pyre for the unsalvageable debris on the other. It was during the second week, as she was struggling to dislodge a heavy, soot-blackened support beam from a tangle of wreckage, that she first saw him. He was on horseback, sitting motionless at the edge of her property line, a silhouette against the harsh afternoon sun. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a stillness about him that was unnerving. As he drew closer, she saw the harsh line of a scar that ran from his temple down his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, grim line. His eyes, shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, seemed to take in everything at once, her sweat-soaked dress, her blistered hands, the impossible task she had set for herself. He was the first person to have approached her land since Finch had abandoned her. She stood her ground, her hand resting on the pry bar she was using, her posture wary. He dismounted, his movements economical and silent. He carried a small, weathered slate and a piece of chalk tied to it with a leather thong. He walked not to her, but to the makeshift shelter she had reinforced against the side of the shed. He studied it for a moment, then wrote on the slate in a surprisingly neat script. He held it up for her to read. "Brace will not hold in high wind." His gaze flicked to a sturdier piece of timber among her salvaged pile, then back to the shelter. Notice then that he watched her mouth as she spoke, his focus intense. "Thank you for the advice," she said, speaking slowly and clearly. He gave a short, sharp nod, as if her comprehension was all the confirmation he needed. Without another gesture, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving her in a profound silence that felt different from the one that had preceded him. It was a silence she now knew was shared. The stranger's visits became a silent, sporadic ritual. He would appear at the edge of the property, a quiet observer to her relentless toil. He never offered unsolicited help, never intruded, but his presence was a constant, watchful thing. Leanne found it strangely comforting rather than threatening. He seemed to be a part of the landscape, as stoic and enduring as the distant mesas. One afternoon, the sun was at its zenith, beating down with a physical weight. Leanne was attempting to move a large section of the collapsed roof, a heavy, awkward lattice of charred timbers. She had managed to lever one end up, but as she tried to shift her position to get more leverage, her foot slipped on a patch of loose ash. The massive weight shifted, pinning the edge of her skirt and threatening to crush her leg. She cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and surprise. Before the sound had fully left her lips, he was there. He moved with a startling, silent speed, covering the distance from the property line in a matter of seconds. He did not pause to assess or ask. He simply put his shoulder to the timber, his muscles straining, and with a single powerful heave, lifted it enough for her to scramble free. He let the wreckage crash back to the ground. He looked at her, his eyes scanning for injury. Seeing she was unharmed, he gave another one of his curt nods. He turned to leave as silently as he had arrived. "Wait," she called out, her voice a little breathless. He stopped, turning back to face her. She took a moment to compose herself, to push a stray strand of hair from her sweat-dampened forehead. "You have not told me your name." He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze steady. He lifted the slate that hung from his saddle horn and wrote a single word. "Reese." He pointed a finger at his own chest, then looked at her expectantly. "Leanne," she replied, enunciating her name carefully. He watched her lips form the word, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than stoicism in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement. The next morning, when he rode past, a canteen of fresh, cool water from her well was sitting on a fence post at the edge of her property. He paused, picked it up, and raised it in a silent salute before continuing on his way. An unspoken agreement had been struck, a conversation conducted without a single word. A trip into Harmony Creek for more supplies was a necessary evil. Leanne needed nails, a new hammer, and more salted meat. The stares she received were less of shock now and more of a grudging curiosity. She had not fled, had not succumbed to despair as everyone had expected. She was still there, a persistent, solitary figure working amidst the ruins. She entered Martha's store, the bell announcing her arrival like an old friend. Martha looked up from her ledger, her sharp eyes taking in Leanne's calloused hands and the practical, sturdy work dress she had sewn for herself from bolts of canvas. The pristine white garment of her arrival was a distant memory. "Still at it, I see," Martha observed, her tone holding a note of something that might have been respect. "Town's got a running bet on how long you'll last. Most had you gone by the first frost." Leanne ignored the bait. "I need nails," she said simply, "and I have a question, if I may." Martha leaned against the counter. "Questions are free. It's the answers that can cost you." Leanne hesitated, choosing her words with care. "There is a man. He lives on the land that borders mine to the west. His name is Reese." Martha's expression became guarded. "Everyone just fine." She paused, her gaze meeting Leanne's. "He's not like other men. The world went quiet for him a long time ago." Preparing and narrating this story, delving into the quiet strength of characters like Leanne and Reese, is a profound experience. It reminds me that communication goes far beyond words. If you're finding meaning in this journey of resilience, a like on the video would be greatly appreciated. It helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. Now, let's return to Harmony Creek and learn more about the silent man on the hill, Martha continued, her voice lowered slightly. "He was a top hand over at the big cattle ranch north of here. Smartest man with a herd you'd ever see. About 5 years back, there was a lightning storm during a drive, a full-blown stampede. He was caught in it, trampled, left for dead. She tapped her own jaw, near the line of Reese's scar. "That's where a hoof caught him. It's what took his hearing. When he finally recovered, the ranch owner claimed he was useless, cheated him out of years of back pay, and ran him off." Leanne listened, her heart aching with a sharp, unexpected pang of empathy. It was a story of betrayal that echoed her own, different in its particulars, but identical in its cruelty. "He's an honest man," Martha finished, her voice firm with conviction. "More honest than any of the church-going gossips in this town. He judges a person by the sweat on their brow, not the chatter on their tongue. He's seen you working. That's the only kind of talk he understands." The information settled over Leanne, recontextualizing everything she knew about the silent man. His gruffness was not hostility, it was a shield. His silence was not a void, it was his world. He was not an outcast by choice, but by circumstance and the callousness of others. She paid for her goods, her mind far away. As she left the store, Martha called after her. "Leanne," she said, using her name for the first time. "That man Reese, he has a good heart, but it's buried deep. Be patient with it." Leanne nodded, the simple advice feeling like a profound gift. She walked back to her homestead not just with nails and provisions, but with understanding, a key to the silent language of the man who lived on the other side of the fence line. The sky had been a deceptive, brilliant blue all day, but as evening approached, a bruised purple stain began to spread from the western horizon. The air grew heavy and still, charged with an electric tension. Leanne had seen skies like this in paintings, but had never felt one. She worked frantically to secure her supplies, tying down tarps over her precious stacks of salvaged lumber. The wind came first, a low moan that grew into a shrieking gale, whipping dust and debris into a blinding frenzy. Then came the rain, not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that hit with the force of thrown gravel. Her small shed, which had felt like a fortress, now seemed as fragile as paper. The roof groaned under the assault, and water began to pour through the very cracks she had once stared at from her bedroll. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not 100%. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her away from the flailing tarp. He pointed insistently toward the west, toward his own property. She couldn't hear him over the roar of the wind, but his meaning was clear. He led her, half running, half dragged, through the blinding rain. He took her not to a cabin, but to a place she had never noticed, a deep outcropping of rock, a natural cave-like shelter carved into the side of a low hill. The entrance was narrow, but inside it was dry and shielded from the storm's fury. The sound of the gale was muted to a distant howl. They stood in the enclosed space, dripping and breathless, the silence between them profound. The air was close, filled with the scent of damp earth and rain. He lit a small, shielded lantern he had tucked inside, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. For the first time they were truly alone together, enclosed and separated from the world. He took out his slate. The chalk was damp, but it still worked. He wrote, "Sky speaks. Listen with eyes." He pointed out at the roiling clouds, then drew a shape on the slate, a distinctive anvil-like formation. He was teaching her, sharing his silent world. In that small stone shelter, surrounded by the storm's chaos, a fragile peace began to bloom. After the storm, everything changed. Reese no longer kept to the periphery of her land. He simply arrived with the morning sun, ready to work. An unspoken partnership had been forged in the crucible of the storm. He was a master craftsman, his hands possessing an innate understanding of wood and stone. He showed her how to notch logs so they fit together seamlessly, how to lay a foundation that was square and true. They worked side by side, their communication a fluid dance of gestures, shared glances, and notes scribbled on his slate. The silence between them was no longer empty, It was filled with the comfortable rhythms of shared labor. One day, as they rested in the shade, sharing a lunch of bread and dried apples, she decided to tell him the truth. She spoke slowly, facing him directly so he could read her lips, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "Reese, the story they tell in town is not the whole truth," she began. "I did not come here as a desperate bride. I came here to be free." She told him about her family in San Francisco, about the gilded cage she was meant to occupy, and about the inheritance from her mother that was her key to liberation. She explained that the mail order arrangement was a ruse, a way for a woman to claim a piece of the world for herself without a husband or father to do it for her. He listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving her face. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stoicism. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them. She worried she had broken the fragile trust they had built, that her deception, however necessary, had created a new wall between them. He finally picked up his slate. He wiped it clean with the heel of his hand and wrote, his movements deliberate. "Land does not care about name, only work." He looked up at her, his eyes clear and direct. Then he added another sentence. "You are not delicate." A slow warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so potent it almost brought tears to her eyes. He did not see her as a fragile doll or a cunning liar. He saw her as she was, a worker, a survivor, a partner. In that moment, watching him, she realized her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely, had quietly, irrevocably been given to the silent man who spoke with his hands and listened with his eyes. They had built it together, their hands. They had built it together, their hands shaping every wall, their shared vision raising it from the foundation stones. They were installing the windows, a delicate task requiring a steady hand, when the sound of an approaching horse made them both look up. It was Alistair Finch. He reined in his horse, his mouth falling slightly open as he took in the scene. The completed cabin, the neat stacks of firewood, and most of all, the sight of Leanne working alongside the town's hulking, deaf outcast. His surprise quickly curdled into a sneer of condescending disapproval. "My dear Miss Shin," he called out, his voice dripping with false concern, "I must confess, I am astonished. I had assumed you would have long since returned to civilization." He dismounted, striding toward them with the arrogant air of a man who believed he owned any ground he stood on. "I see you've made a valiant effort and acquired some local help." He cast a dismissive glance at Reese, who had gone utterly still, his hand resting on the frame of the window, his eyes narrowed. "But this is no life for a lady of your quality," Finch continued, turning his attention back to Leanne. "As it happens, I have been in correspondence with a very respectable family back east. They are in need of a governess for their children. A fine position. I am prepared to refund your initial land deposit as a gesture of goodwill and arrange your passage. It is the Christian thing to do." He was trying to erase her, to sweep her and her inconvenient resilience off the land he had likely already promised to another buyer. He saw her not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. The insult was profound, not just to her, but to the life she and Reese were building. Reese stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Leanne, a silent, immovable wall. Finch laughed, a short, ugly sound. "And you've taken up with the local mute? How provincial. Can he even understand what a fool you're being?" Leanne stepped out from behind Reese, her posture radiating a calm and absolute authority that made Finch's condescension falter. The woman he faced was not the same one he had abandoned in the ashes weeks ago. The sun had browned her skin and her hands were calloused, but her eyes held the unyielding glint of fired steel. "Mr. Finch, you misunderstand the situation entirely," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the still air. "I am not leaving. In fact, your visit is quite timely. I was planning to ride into town to register the purchase of another parcel of land." Finch's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. "Another parcel? What are you talking about?" From the leather satchel at her waist, Leanne produced a folded document. It was not a wad of cash, but something far more powerful. A bank draft, drawn from a San Francisco bank for an amount that made Finch's eyes widen in disbelief. "I am buying the adjacent 300 acres, Leanne stated calmly. "The section owned by the railroad, which you so helpfully assured me was locked in litigation and entirely unavailable. A telegram to my lawyer found otherwise. It seems a significant offer can untangle even the most stubborn of legal knots." Finch was speechless. He stared at the bank draft, then at Leanne, his mind struggling to reconcile the soot-stained woman before him with the kind of wealth that could move railroads. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the predator. He was the one who had been outmaneuvered. Leanne folded the document and tucked it away. Then she turned her back on him completely, facing Reese. "You will have it." Her next words were, "You will have it." Her next words were softer, a question that held the weight of her entire future. "If you will have me." Reese stood frozen for a long second, his gaze locked on hers. He looked from her earnest face to the half-finished cabin, to the wide expanse of land that stretched to the horizon. A slow, profound understanding dawned in his eyes, chasing away the shadows of his past, of his solitude. He reached for the slate at his belt, his hand surprisingly steady. He wiped it clean, and in his neat, careful script wrote a single word: home. He set the slate down and reached out, his calloused fingers gently taking her hand. Their palms met, a silent contract sealed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories waiting for you on the screen. One is a tale of unexpected inheritance and family secrets, and the other is a gripping story of survival against the odds. Click on whichever one calls to you, and I'll see you there.